Our speaker today is Rebecca Williams. She's a professor of public law and criminal law at Pembroke College, Oxford University. And she teaches law and computing science, as well as criminal law and public law. But I met Rebecca, I think, at a Legal Geek event. I think they experimented with having a third day dedicated to tech for good. That's where we met, and we discovered that we were both interested in teaching legal tech skills. And then Rebecca has been involved in some UK government-funded research aimed at making sense of the potential of AI for English law. And that's why she seemed to be the natural first speaker to an association of teachers and researchers. And so now, Rebecca, it's with very great pleasure that I hand over to you for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Andy, and thank you to you and Renan and Dan for the invitation. I think it's a hugely exciting association to be part of, and I'm really, really grateful for being involved at such an early stage. Thank you. So what Andy and Renan have asked me to talk about is, as it says on the slide, the challenges and opportunities of teaching law and technology. So that's what it is I'm going to talk to you about. Next slide, please. So as Andy mentioned, the work that I've done on this was part of a UKRI funded research project which ran across Oxford called Unlocking the Potential of AI for English Law, which was about exactly that, trying to work out what we needed to do to make the most of the potential that AI had to offer for the legal services profession in the UK. Next slide, please. So as I say, there were various different work packages running on this project across Oxford. People were looking at how business models were going to change in legal services in the light of all of this, what exactly was happening in terms of the justice system, in terms of digital justice, what exactly can be done from a technical AI point of view in terms of legal reasoning, how might we think about coordinating skills investment and tech transfer between companies and educational establishments, mapping the law tech and innovation ecosystems, what makes for successful innovation, when will a company take off, and what are the factors of success that we see there. And my work package was the last of those. Next slide, please, which is the focus on law and technology education. How do we need to think about educating lawyers differently as they go out into a world which increasingly will involve digital tech? Next slide, please. So what we did was we adopted two different research methods. My colleague, Dr. Václav Janacek on the project, did a lot of semi-structured interviews with all sorts of very broadly defined legal service providers to find out what they perceived as being the skills gaps in terms of the people they were recruiting and where they wished they had more skills and more education. And then in an attempt to fill those gaps, we started off running an experimental course in law and computer science, which we set up jointly with the Department of Computer Science, and my counterpart there who co-convenes the course with me is Professor Tom Mellom, and there's a website on the slide which no doubt will be available later, which shows you a little bit more about what we're doing. Next slide, please. So what we established in Václav's interviews was that these legal service providers were telling us that they were seeing 5 different skills gaps. So the first one was about mindset, that lawyers and computer scientists do tend to think about things slightly differently. And worse than that, we sometimes use the same word to describe something which actually is 2 quite different concepts. And so just understanding where the other discipline is coming from and what the way in which they're going to think is going to be and how that fits with our way of thinking is a really important part of learning to work cooperatively and productively with another discipline. We also discovered that they wanted lawyers to have more of an awareness of data, that data flows through lawyers' hands all the time, but they don't always realise that, and they don't always realise the uses to which that data could be put if it was harnessed and something was done with it. We also found that there was a sense of a lack of commercial awareness in terms of the decisions that have to be made, whether it's about adopting tech or more broadly. Are people thinking about the pros and cons and what does that look like from a commercial perspective? There was also a sense that it would be nice for lawyers to think in a more agile or design-oriented way. So not just go about solving a problem the way they've always solved a problem, but think, well, how am I solving this problem? And is there a better route or an automated route or a more efficient and straightforward route to solving this problem? Is there another way of doing things that I typically do without thinking about it? Could I think about it and could I do them differently? And then, of course, we identified a huge skills gap in relation to the fifth of those things, which is the law and ethics of digital tech. So a sense that the law will have to adapt in order to deal with technological contexts as well as human contexts, and that lawyers will need an understanding of that and an understanding of the ethics that underlie it. Next slide, please. So this is a sort of map of the course that we set up in order to try to address some of those skills gaps, the course that I mentioned before. We take equal numbers of lawyers and computer scientists from the two departments in the university, so it's usually 16 of each at the moment, giving us a cohort of 32 every year. They have 16 core lecture seminars which run through 2 terms of the year, the autumn term and the spring term. Each of those lecture seminars is co-taught at the front of the classroom by a member of staff from each of the 2 faculties, or sometimes we go more broadly to faculties elsewhere around the world, particularly people who've had links with Oxford in the past. And of course, the students are mixed together in the sessions as well. So those are absolutely 100% interdisciplinary sessions with both the front of the classroom and the contents of the classroom itself 100% interdisciplinary. And they involve some information delivery on the part of the lecturers at the front, but also quite a lot of small group work to solve problems during the session based on the information that they've received. Those faculty academics who are teaching the sessions are themselves drawing on what is their own research and their own world-leading expertise in this regard. And what we quite often find in terms of the outputs of this is that, having put them together at the front of the classroom to teach one of our sessions, we sort of introduce them to each other and match made them in that sense. We then find that quite often they do go away and write together, and that what they've taught at the front of the classroom becomes then a research project for them. Alongside those theoretical sessions, we also put the students into groups of 8, so 4 lawyers, 4 computer scientists, and we give them a piece of either NLP or blockchain technology, and we say, go and create a product with it. It doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be the user interface doesn't have to be perfect, but just over the course of the 2 terms, try and build something together as an interdisciplinary team, and that really gets them talking to each other and collaborating on actually doing something very practical. We have 6 sessions, 6 practical lab sessions, 3 in each term, to help them and guide them with that through the process. We have 2 fantastic technical project supervisors, one for NLP and one for blockchain, but we also have an amazing panel of industry mentors and sponsors, and we can divide those mentors up and say, right, team A, these are your 3 experts in the legal tech industry with either a technical or a legal background who know a little bit about the sort of field that you've chosen to work in for your project, and they can advise you on that project and help you to focus it and get the most out of it. And that team of industry mentors, they do it entirely pro bono out of the goodness of their heart, and they are absolutely fantastic, and we could not manage without them. So in terms of the outputs of the course, I've already mentioned one of them, which is the cross-departmental research. We also talk about making the graduates from the course bilingual. So the lawyers don't all learn to code. They perhaps try a little bit of it out, but they don't completely learn to code. The computer scientists don't turn into lawyers overnight, but we do get them, we think, to a point where they can have intelligent conversations with each other. They know what terminology the other discipline is using, and they can ask intelligent questions. And that's really the chief thing that we're looking for, is trying to make them bilingual so that they can have those intelligent and productive conversations. We've started to see some of the projects leading into more startup activities. Obviously, we have fantastic industry engagement via our industry mentors and sponsors. I've mentioned the research, and the other thing, which I'll say a little bit more about in the moment, is that we've also started to do some executive education in this area as well. Next slide, please. So if we look at how we go about in the course trying to fill those 5 gaps that I identified earlier. So the first one was the mindset understanding. And as I say, the whole setup of our course is interdisciplinary. And in fact, the first section of sessions, the theoretical sessions in the autumn term, we actually look at that interdisciplinarity, look at the terminology and our different ways of thinking and how we might see them intersecting for the rest of the course. And of course, also the project work, because the students have to work together in that interdisciplinary environment, that really helps as well. Next slide, please. In terms of data-oriented thinking, then we talk in the second half of the autumn term, we look at how technology is supporting the practice and profession of law. So tech for law, you might call that, and we look at it in that context as well. But in the spring term, we also look at how the law is having to adapt to issues like technology and in relation to data. And so we think about some of these issues there as well, things like the law of privacy, how data is gathered, how important it is that our data be reflective, not discriminatory, how we can bake the wrong things into a system by using the wrong data. And of course, NLP is one of the practical project options, and those students in particular focus on data sets in their practical project work. Next slide, please. Agile system and design thinking, again, when we look at the tech for law, automation of law section of the course, we think about how might law and practice be automated or augmented, where can tech be brought in to help lawyers in their daily practice? What are the problems that we're trying to solve, and how can we see each of the 2 disciplines working together to solve those problems? And then, of course, as part of the practical stream of the course, we also have a specific design thinking workshop right at the beginning when they're starting to formulate their practical project ideas. Next slide, please. As far as commercial awareness is concerned, we don't really do huge amounts of entrepreneurship in what we do with them, but we do give them a sort of chance at the end of the process to present their project as a kind of pitch. We have a bit of a celebration on the last practical project session, and we invite some guests in as well as their industry mentors to see the final presentations of their practical projects, and we show them a seed deck and we say, you know, you can structure your presentations around this as if you were looking for seed funding for your project at this stage. They have a little bit of a taste of that then. I mentioned our fantastic panel of legal tech mentors before, and we also, when we're thinking about the augmentation and automation of law, we also think about some of the commercial pressures and incentives that we might see behind that automation in that part of the course as well. Next slide, please. And then as far as that big gap in terms of the law and digital ethics is concerned, that really is what the whole of the spring term's theoretical sessions is based on. What we look at week by week is how different areas of substantive law are going to need to adjust to deal with the fact that they're dealing with technological issues, not just human-based ones. So, for example, we look at algorithmic collusion in competition law, we look at digital evidence in criminal law, we look at algorithmic decision-making and judicial review. Every week we get a different lawyer from a different field of law to come in and talk to an expert on the technology that is presenting problems for that area of law, about what those problems are that are emerging and how the two disciplines might work together to solve them. And then in their small groups in the theoretical sessions, we go through some problems with the students to see if they can help with that process. Next slide, please. So that's how we've tried to respond to the challenges that we identified at the outset in our initial research and our conversations with legal service providers about the skills gaps they were seeing. What challenges are we left with? Well, we have a sort of an ongoing challenge really with the two disciplines in terms of encouraging students to overcome their fear of the opposite skill set. So we know that we have to talk computer scientists down from their concerns about having to write essays and so on. We know that lawyers can be quite worried about having to grasp technical knowledge, which is obviously something that's not sort of familiar to a lot of them, though increasingly they are coming through with some technical knowledge already. So what we do to deal with that is to really very much focus on this interdisciplinarity, to say, look, we're not expecting, you know, huge levels of prowess in the opposing discipline. We're not looking for you to be able to write brilliant essays. You know, the quality or grace of your writing is not what we give you marks for. What we give you marks for is really engaging with the other discipline as much as you possibly can. So if at the end of the day we think when we read your script we can't really tell whether you were a lawyer or a computer scientist, doesn't matter how beautifully written it is, doesn't matter what else you've done, that's what it is that we're looking for. And we try to help people to overcome their fear of trying something new and coming on a course which is quite outside their comfort zone in a lot of cases. The other big challenge we have is to try to extend this interdisciplinarity beyond the classroom. And I mentioned before that we are trying to do some executive education in this area, and we've launched a thing called OLTEP, the Oxford Law Tech Education Programme, to try to do this. It's all very well if you go through university now and you have access to some of these amazing courses like Andy's, and I hope like ours too. But of course, if you're already in the workplace and you went through university at a time when those courses were not available, then there's a big gap there that we need to fill. And that's something that we with OLTEP have been trying to extend our learning from the course into executive education to help with. Next slide, please. And really what that tells us is that, yes, it's a remaining challenge to extend into the workplace, but actually it's also really another opportunity for universities. Universities are great places for these kinds of interdisciplinary law and courses because we have other faculties right there that, you know, and you can email somebody from that faculty and say, hello, I'm just from the faculty down the road, you know, would you like to have a conversation about how we might collaborate? So really, if we as an interdisciplinary environment in a university can't do this, I can't see who would really. The fact that we also in our research and research across the project have seen more in the way of what we thought of as lattice career structures, people moving sideways as well as up and down through a profession. And the reduction of the focus of any particular employer as a source of continuing professional development means there's a real role there for universities to help people to move sideways into a slightly different career or to fill those CPD gaps in the workplace. And that really, as I say, is a challenge, but also an opportunity for universities. And in doing that, as a university, we can draw not just on market demand and what people think they want, but we can also use a strong, objective, independent, peer-reviewed research base to inform what we provide people with, to make sure that not only are we, you know, doing good in a general sense, but we're also guiding the field itself in the most effective way that we can. Next slide, please. So that's it from me, really. As Andy mentioned, we have done some work on this and there's a couple of references there. But really, yeah, thank you again so much for the opportunity to talk to you. And I really look forward to hearing everybody's questions.
Rebecca, thanks very much. We already have a question in from Professor Dan Hunter, which was also, I was going to ask if he didn't. It sounds very exciting that you can make available blockchain and NLP for you students to work on. Was that something you found lying around in the back of the cupboard? Did you spend £1 million? How do you do that?
So we built up gradually. So the first year we were only able to offer blockchain. And actually what we did then, because we'd never done it before, was our practical project supervisor sort of had some really off the shelf stuff that was almost like Lego for the students, because we weren't really sure what they would be up to doing. And he had all sorts of pre-prepared things that they could just sort of adapt a little bit if they wanted to. And what we were completely blown away by the first time round was the fact that they had much better ideas than anything we thought of. They didn't really want that much in the way of help. Again, we'd said to them, don't worry too much about user interfaces, just have a go. By nearing the end of the time, can we have a user interface? Can we start putting something on it so that it looks nice and we can have people interact with it? So we were really impressed actually with how much they wanted to do and how much they could do. As say, we'd had everything almost done for them just in case, and that really wasn't necessary. NLP was something that we could bring in the second year. Matthias Kian is one of the people who worked with us on the Unlocking the Potential project, and through that he had contacts with various startups who are doing legal tech with various databases. And so what he's been able to do, I think, is to put students in touch with some of those startups and get the students to do things. And of course, they're quite happy for the students to have a sort of play with their data, so that, because anything the students learn that can be done with it is obviously something that those startups can potentially make use of as well. So so that's what we've done there.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, please? Yes, please, Michael. I don't see it. Any more questions? All right.
Andy, I might just unmute myself there and answer the question that I put in the chat, but maybe has gotten lost somewhere. Rebecca, you mentioned that you talked to the class as a whole about substantive law problems. How did the computer science students respond to having to deal with things that are in ways sometimes a little bit technical and theoretical from a legal perspective? Do they understand those issues, or is this too far out of their ken? I'm just wondering how they struggle with or if they struggle with them, because these interdisciplinary aspects of teaching, I think, are the most interesting and the most difficult.
No, I completely agree with that. I think that's absolutely right. What we do is right at the beginning of the course, we do a tiny bit of on-ramping. It's the one time actually we teach the students separately, is in the very, very first session. And what we do is that I do a session on law for computer scientists, and Tom does a session on computer science for lawyers, and we do the absolute basics. So I literally give them a map of the law and explain that, private law is different from public law, is different from criminal law, and so on, and how they fit together. I do a little bit of legal reasoning with them just to show common law development of a principle through case law based on interpreting a statute, this kind of thing. So we do that one little bit of on-ramping right at the beginning. Then in the substantive sessions in the spring term, where we're looking at, judicial review and algorithmic decision making, we'll have, again, a bit at the beginning of the session where the computer science tutor will go through, what the technology is, what the different kinds of systems are that might be running underneath a government decision making system, for example. And I will similarly do a kind of introduction to judicial review and, how the grounds work and how those grounds might then bite on the area of technology. To some extent, we are each talking to the discipline we're not from in that sense. So I'm sort of trying to bring the computer scientists up to speed, and Tom, or my colleague who's talking about the technology, is trying to bring the lawyers up to speed. But actually what we find is that even for our own people from our own discipline, our own students' discipline, that very often can be new things or a way of thinking about things that they hadn't thought about before. When we do the smart contract section, for example, the law teacher says, let's just think about what a contract is exactly. And actually law students, we learn what they are. We learn offer, acceptance, consideration very early on. We don't all that often sit back and go, why do we even have them? What do they look like? What else could they look like if it wasn't like this? And so actually very often what we found through the research project, the first time that we ran the course, we surveyed the students very carefully to find out what they were getting out of the course and how it was working. And one of the comments that we were getting from both disciplines from the students was, do you know what, I understand my own discipline better because I've sat in a classroom with some other people who are from a different discipline and I've had to look at it through their eyes, and they'd had chance to ask those questions like, actually, what is a contract and what do we have them for, and why, you know, could we do any of them differently, and these kinds of things, which are not questions that I think they get to ask normally. Particularly, we're taking master's level students who are very deep into their own disciplines, and actually starting from scratch and starting from the basics of their own discipline again can be quite helpful. So some of that on-ramping we found is not just helpful for the people from a new discipline, but also helpful for the existing students.
And on a related point, I've asked my first year contract team to introduce the students to contract automation. So we're kind of giving the students an eye on technology at the beginning of the course. And as we were doing that, I realized that in all these years, I don't think we ever showed the students a contract. We taught them contract, we taught them offer and acceptance, etc., etc. I don't think they ever saw a contract. That is, you know, in retrospect, mad. Brian, we've got Brian Tang from Hong Kong. Hello, Brian. It's really great to see you again. Brian says, what year are your students? I think you may have just answered that question.
That's right. So they are master's level law students. So BCLM, JUR, MLF are our three slightly bizarrely acronymed master's courses that we have in law at Oxford. And they're either fourth year or MSc for computer science. Yeah. We'd love for it to be an undergraduate thing as well. We don't have the capacity to do it at the moment, but in the long run, I would love to do that. Just as Andy, I would also love there to be a little bit of all of our spring term. I would like a little bit of that in each of those courses. So a little bit of the algorithmic decision making and judicial review in ordinary public law, and a little bit of the, you know, I'm sure there is some of the algorithmic collusion in the competition law course, but I would like there to be a little bit of leakage into the ordinary law courses as well from that term.
Yes, and Dan Linner from Northwestern in Chicago says, great course and initiatives. One challenge is that we need this education in our traditional courses, which is the point that you're making.
Totally.
Any suggestions for winning over traditional faculty?
Yeah, well, I'd love to tell you that I found the magic solution to that. I mean, we have a particular problem in Oxford in that we love telling people that we have a very holistic view of things, and that's why they have to learn absolutely everything over the course of their time here, and there's therefore no wiggle room in the syllabus. I think, you know, in a sense, that is what makes the case for it, right? If we are going to give students a holistic view, that's one of the points that I make very strongly, is that, well, you know, this is part of giving students a holistic view of what law is and what it's going to have to be now. And also, I like very much this idea that we're giving them a way of looking at their own discipline again. I mean, when we do, again, we're very traditional faculty in Oxford, but when we do the automation of law at the beginning, we look at vagueness in law and as a jurisprudential concept. So there's lots of jurisprudence, which, given that we actually call our course jurisprudence in Oxford, that's the sort of thing that I think actually helps to make people realise that this is not kind of faddish or just a, you know, thing that sounds cool, but it does actually go to the core of what we do, and that if we take our own academic subject seriously, this would be a thing that we would want students to think about.
I hope that our association will be partly a resource for generating useful, effective case studies and tools to use. I was at a skills conference yesterday, and we were talking about whether or not you could use tech or talk about tech in a taught course. And we talked about the regulation of safe driving cars, and we talked about the great sort of MIT, is it called the moral lab? I can't remember, where you decide who's going to die, you know, the cats or the blind people or the crooks. So I think that's another thing. I think that if we go at the traditional faculty in areas where they need to discuss issues around perhaps the use and regulation of technology, and we can provide them tools and case studies to help with that. Robert Herrion, thanks, Rebecca. To what extent do you have any focus on policy and or public service and provision?
It's a great question, and I think we'd like a little bit more of it than we do. I mean, what I do a bit of, so I do the public law session, and we look a little bit at it then. So we look a little bit at government use of technology in that session. And obviously, where there is regulation relevant to any of the things that we're talking about, we bring that into the sessions as well. It's one of those things that is sort of always at the edges of what we do, and we can't possibly do everything in the course. And another thing I would like to do would be to, you know, to have a bigger version of the course where it was not just one module on existing masters, but actually a whole course in itself, and that would give us a bit more time to explore some things. And that would be one of the things I would really like to explore more than we currently do.
Thank you. Dan Linner says, hope you can get a copy of your slides. Yes, and we think we're recording. We'll find out when we've finished whether we were successful. But one of the plans for the association is that we should rotate webinars through the time zones. Right now, it's very unlikely that any of the Australians have been able to join us. So they and lots of other people can use the recording if we've made it. But we will definitely share the slides if for any reason the recording has failed. Dan Hunter says, how have you found the exec ed take up? Are law firms interested in the topic?
Yes, so Slaughter and May was our project partner for the UKRI project, and so we co-developed the first round of courses with them. So we've delivered courses to them. We've also delivered them in a different version of the course in the government sector to the government legal department and the Office for AI. So we have delivered to hundreds of lawyers now, actually, in both private and public settings, and that's something that we'd like to develop. So we'd like to keep running what we've done so far tend to be quite entry level things. So some of the stuff that we do right at the beginning of the university course, just orienting people who've not had access to this kind of information and material before. And what we'd like to do is to follow that up with some more advanced modules, so that people who've perhaps done our basic modules in the past can then come and do some of the more advanced stuff that we do later in the course.
Thanks. And I think it looks to me like you have startups offered free and trial accounts to you. Yes,
they have. We are. I know this is something you have experience of as well, Andy. We have worked with startups, and I mentioned before that they've been quite helpful in relation to the providing data for the NLP stream of our practical projects. We have tended to be quite careful not to get too close to any one particular provider, not least because we have computer scientists on the course, and so we want them to be building things from scratch rather than using too much that's that's already available. As I say, we did have some of that lined up the first year, and once it's turned out not to be necessary, we think actually it's really good for them to build their own things rather than as using any of the products that are out there that if we were running a lawyers only course we might need, but with the computer scientists on board as well, we tend not to need.
Okay, Dan Linner, just wanted to add that our Northwestern computer science students add tremendous value to our interdisciplinary innovation lab. They're eager to collaborate. Law is a very sexy field, but we're traditionally put up too many barriers to technologists collaborating with lawyers and legal research. Sturgios Adinlis, sorry for the pronunciation. Hi, Rebecca. Thank you for this very interesting presentation. I was wondering about the module assessment. Did CS and law faculty co-grade? Did you assess through the group projects? Were there any essays, any reflections about the assessment process?
Yeah, so you've hit on one of the sort of perhaps more mundane sides of the course, but one of the ones that has been really challenging and really interesting from a sort of interdisciplinary perspective. So the formal assessment is done exclusively through 2 assessed essays of 3,000 words, which are take-home essays that the students do over Easter. So the course finishes just before Easter, and over the Easter back they have these 2 take-home essays to complete. The first essay asks them to think about some of the broader questions on the first half of the course about the automation of law generally, and the advantages and disadvantages of doing that, the possibility of doing that, what we lose when we do that, those sorts of more general issues. They've also had some theoretical sessions on things like interaction with disability law and digital exclusion and so on. So we ask them to reflect on those more general issues. Then the second essay picks up some of the more specific topics. So we might ask them, for example, to look at algorithmic decision making in 2 contexts, which would be public and private or something like that, and picks up on those questions, so they're more specific. That does mean that we do have to do quite a bit of bringing the computer scientists up to speed with writing essays, and again that's one of the things that worries them about coming on the course, and we have to be very clear about that. But that goes to what I was saying before about not being too picky about how it's written. It's really that interdisciplinarity in the writing that we're looking for above all else. So and they do take to that and do absolutely fine. In terms of grading, what we did discover is that lawyers are much meaner than computer scientists, so we have to give people 2 grades. We give them the law grade, and then we scale it up a little bit to give them the computer science grade. And so whereas a law faculty person would, if you got 73 in the law faculty, that would be worthy of being framed. That's a perfectly normal first class mark for a computer scientist, and they would expect more marks than that. And so we have had to overcome that one with a scaling system. So that was just an interesting interdisciplinary reflection. But yeah, we don't at the moment grade the practical projects. We have toyed with the idea of doing it. We are a little bit afraid that we would lose some of what we get with them if we started grading them, because at the moment the students really very largely do them for the love of them, and I think that works really well. And we're a little bit worried that if we started making them assessed, then that might discourage students or might make them more careful about, well, I've done this and you've done that and this kind of thing. And we worry a little bit that it would change the ethos of them, which at the moment, as I say, works really, really well. So we don't at the moment assess the practical projects. They get a kind of, we sort of give them a practical mark for that, which means nothing to lawyers and a little bit to computer science, but not really.
Well, that might make a really good future workshop, because I'm sure we're all wrestling with this. We do. We have an individual assessment on reflecting on your career, PDP, the impact of technology and so on, and then a group work mark. And we've created a free rider mechanism in which everybody reviews everybody, and depending on whether your grade is above the average or below, we've got an algorithm that distributes the marks up or down, and we developed that with the students. So that was quite a lot of buy-in. So I think that would be a really interesting topic for
yes, it would, for
a future discussion. Dan says, following up, we should talk about computable contracts, smart contracts, and blockchain in contract class. Yes, I agree. Contract drafting and review tools should be discussed in contracts and legal writing courses. There's another workshop, but I'm really looking forward to some future events, and I think that send your ideas in, and hopefully we can make the association a very useful forum for building and sharing ideas. Dennis Kennedy, how long did it take you to go from initial idea to implementing the first class? Would that be a reasonable expectation for programs of this type at other schools?
So it took us a year really to a year of the research project running for us to conceive the course and then set it up and talk to all the relevant people, get all the relevant faculty on board. As I say, we have a big variety of different faculty who come and teach on it. And so it took quite a long time to get those people all set up and get the diary working for it. But yeah, so it was really a year from us starting to think about how it would work to actually running the first time. And as I say, we've kind of developed this as we've gone along. So the first time we did only use blockchain in the practical projects, and we kept things as simple as possible. And we've gradually, the industry mentors we brought in for the second year and so on, we've gradually sort of built on it year to year. As we've done it every year, we try something slightly different from what we did the previous year.
Yeah, we freed our minds a little bit by just saying it's an option. It's the outcomes are skills based. And so we started and made it better as we went along. But a year or two, perhaps, from the decision to start to getting it up and running. Brian Tang from Hong Kong. Our LITE lab is interdisciplinary and experiential program too. And we run team projects, all undergrad. I find that assessment is the most challenging. How do you address that? Well, Brian, I'm running behind the conversation, and hopefully you've now heard the answer to that. Apologies. I think that is the last of our questions, though you've probably got 2 or 3 seconds to jump in if you've got any more questions you want to ask. Otherwise, I'm going to say, well, first of all, virtual applause to Rebecca. Thanks very much. Thanks for being our first speaker. It was really interesting. And your work, I would recommend your research to everybody who's interested, but also to anybody who needs to make an argument to a dean, to their colleagues, that this should be on a law course. It's not proper law, we all know that, but this would help you make the argument that this is what our graduates need. Otherwise, we're taking their money and we're sending them out to look for jobs that were there when they thought about becoming a lawyer and might not be there by the time that they've qualified. So, Rebecca, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Renan, can you take us on a walking tour of the new website?
Thanks very much, Andy. I'll do that now. But before I do, actually, I'm going to abuse the fact that I have the floor to just ask Rebecca one other question that I had. Coming back to what you said at the beginning, Rebecca, you talked about how this sometimes makes you rethink what you do from the ground up. And one of the pieces of feedback that I've gotten from the students that I've been teaching, not quite the same thing as you, but similar in some aspects of approach, is that that lawyers are sometimes too focused on solutions rather than on thinking about what the actual problem they're trying to solve is. Now, I think that might be an artifact of the fact that they're brought through a design thinking method, which really encourages them to do that. But they do at the end confess to being very impatient to fix the problem rather than actually identify what it is. And I'm just wondering, is that something you've identified, and is that something that maybe lawyers in general should be thinking about, not just in terms of these skills or tech-focused classes, but in terms of our teaching generally? Are we too focused on solutions?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I think yes, we probably are, and I think it's something that's just applicable to everybody, even in a non-legal, non-digital context. You know, don't ever just do a thing, but think, why are we doing it like this? You know, is there a better way that we could do this thing that we're doing? And I do think that one of the things that the course has done, and it's done it for me as a researcher as well as I think for the students, is teaching us to think about law as a kind of toolkit. You know, thinking about, well, what does a particular area of law do, and why does it do that, and then possibly how might you deploy those tools somewhere else? You know, where else could you borrow those techniques, which at the moment, you know, we tend to be quite siloed in our thinking about law as a discipline, and contracts and public laws this, and you know, they're separate, and actually thinking, well, what do we do in one area, and is that something that we could borrow across to another area, even in a purely legal context? I think it frees our ability to think about those things. So I think you're absolutely right, and I think anything really that encourages us to think outside of our usual thought processes and our usual assumptions, and think about what we're doing and how we're doing it, and whether that could be improved on, you know, even if it's in a very non-legal, you know, non-technical context. And I think that's a very useful skill for somebody to have, and I can't believe it wouldn't make them a great employee, you know, if they could see avenues and routes to doing something that somebody's maybe never thought of before. So yeah, absolutely, I think that's an incredibly useful skill for any graduate really to have.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. Yeah, in my own experience of researching and teaching in this area, it occurs to me that in many ways the technology is the least important and least interesting aspect of it. I think it's the other applications that's beyond the tech that is really the valuable part. But anyway, as I said, I'm abusing the fact that I have the floor, and my role for the moment is just to walk you through the website very briefly. So let me do that now. You've presumably all familiar with the website, and have at least come to it in order to register for this event. But there's a number of different things that the website can do for us that I'd just like to show everybody before we wrap up. So there is, as always, a homepage which will contain information on new and upcoming events and so on, and some of the sort of selected items of news that are elsewhere on the site. But really the valuable parts of the site, or the parts of the site that I hope will be valuable in the future as we all work to build it collectively, is that there is space for us to write and post articles. These could be about a variety of different things to do with research or to do with teaching. And as you can see, there's not an awful lot there quite yet, and all of the contributions have come from me. But any member of the site can post something here. In the new year, I've got a new module I'm going to be teaching on law and analytics, and unless I end up sitting up until the small hours trying to get Python to do what I wanted to do, I am going to write some articles for this, just documenting how that process has gone for me so that other people can learn from it. And that's the kind of thing that I think would be useful here, is as people have reflections such as Rebecca's or Andy's on aspects of assessment, you know, maybe just write those up and post them here and share them with other people. There is also a page listing events all around the world that are of relevance. I try to keep this up to date, but I don't know about everything. So if you're running an event, workshop, seminar, online event, physical event, it doesn't matter, that is of some relevance to people who are researching and teaching in these areas of law and technology, then just come along and you can easily add it there, and it will be listed on the site, and will also be mailed out to those who've signed up for the IFLA member list, mailing list rather, when they sign up. So that can be a very useful way to spread the word about something that you're running. And as I say, really needs your help in order to make sure that that listing is as comprehensive as possible. We also have a page listing all of the members of the organization. As you can see, we have a map which shows you where people are, and we have, at this point, really genuinely a worldwide reach. As Andy said, we actually have people in Brazil who are signing up at the moment. If you know of other people around the world who would be of interest, this would be of interest to them, then please share the word. I'm really keen to try to extend it also beyond English-speaking countries, because obviously that's where we've tended to come from. But these are global issues, and the more the merrier. Essentially, you can search for people by name or by interest, and you can click on particular individuals to find out more about them and their particular interests, and perhaps finding contact information and so on if you want to follow up with someone more specifically. We also have some resource hubs essentially within the site. Again, looking for contributions to this. We have one section which is called academic materials. That's deliberately a vague term. It's not just research, or it's not just teaching. Probably most of the materials that will end up here will be teaching focused. So these could be things like module outlines or information on assessment. What's there at the moment is one of my own modules. But if you have material from one of your courses that you're willing to share that other people might use as a template or to take ideas from, then it'd be great if you could post them there. But this could also be used for research materials. If you've developed something like a semi-structured interview question or a survey instrument, or some of the thing that can be used for a research purpose and might be reusable or could be adapted by some other researcher somewhere else in the world, so we can all avoid reinventing the wheel, then it'd be great to post that up. Again, it's relatively straightforward to add material and to flag it and tag it and share it through that mechanism. And this information is only available to people who are actually members who are logged into the site. It's not available to the whole world. We also have a links page, so this is intended to be a library of information from around the world about questions of law and technology. Again, I try to keep this relatively updated, although as you can see, as the term got busier, my updates became slower, and it'd be great to have contributions from other people as well. Most of what is in here are either links to other sort of central sites around the world, or to reports and other sort of key documents documenting how this type of technology is being taken up, and more critical perspectives around it as well, things that are working and things that are not working so well, such as issues around discrimination, big data, and so on, which I think are quite important, and things for us to keep in mind as we're trying to educate the next generation of lawyers around how these tools will be used in practice. The last thing I'll mention to you in terms of the site as well is that we have a Twitter feed. In time, once I've finished with the crop of marking I have to deal with now, we might move over to Mastodon as well. But if you have news of one sort or another, you can easily post it here. So this is much more lightweight way of spreading the news about things, and you can click on the link. I'm not actually logged in at the moment, but I can post a news story there and have that posted onto the Twitter feed, so it's a useful way of getting information out about new academic articles or research studies and so on. You can use it to promote your own work or other things that you think would be useful and relevant to other people who are working and researching and teaching in this area. So that is a very whistle-stop tour of the website. I hope you find it useful.